Hey everyone, this is David Chalian, the CNN political director, and this is the Daily DC. Thanks so much for listening. Today on the podcast, we have a very special guest for our Friday feature. She is CNN's national correspondent, normally based in Los Angeles, Sarah Seidner, who has been doing extraordinary work this week, as she has done over the course of her career, looking at hate groups, reporting on race relations in America, and obviously nothing has dominated the news this week after Charlottesville like those topics. So, Sarah, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure, David.
Sarah, let me begin, first of all. This is not the first time you've experienced or covered, even from afar, people, anti-Semites or neo-Nazis marching in a city somewhere, correct?
Certainly. Absolutely correct.
So what made this get so volatile and violent? What occurred that this event in Charlottesville was different from some previous kinds of hate groups getting permits or exercising their free speech rights?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, the obvious answer to that is that someone died in this particular incident. And when that happens, you know, Heather Heyer lost her life. There were several other people, more than a dozen, who were injured. You had two sheriff's deputies who lost their lives as they were trying to get the crowd under control, going up in a helicopter and paying attention that way. And so I think when it boils down to it, the reason why this, you know, exploded in a different way is because you had these two sides coming together, and more importantly, you had the white supremacist neo-Nazis making plans for weeks. So for weeks, people knew this was coming. There was time for everyone to plan, if you will. The neo-Nazis sending messages to each other through Facebook and on their different 4chan channels. And, you know, they've been talking to each other and sending out these messages to people, as well as the white nationalists and the alt-right, if you will, also trying to get as many people as they could to Charlottesville. And in so doing, of course, people who are against what they stand for were also paying attention to that. And they, too, decided we are going to show up and we're going to fight against this. And whenever you have these two groups coming at each other, those who are counter-protesting and those who are there trying to get this, you know, really, excuse the expression, disgusting message out to the world, you are going to have clashes. It is interesting to note that I was in Houston not too long ago. We were doing another story on a neo-Nazi group. They came out to Houston. So did another huge group of people who wanted to keep the statue of Sam Houston in place in Houston, Texas. And no counter-protesters showed up. It was a peaceful rally. Were there a lot of police there? Yes. And what I noticed during that particular incident is that those who did not believe in neo-Nazi ideals, those who were not on the extreme of the extreme, wanted the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists separated. And so the police actually went in to hundreds of people and separated out those who were the extremes, carrying flags, carrying sort of neo-Nazi symbols, and put them in literally a pen, if you will, separated from those who had come, who said that, look, we are the far right. We are here to try and save our statues, but we do not believe in what those neo-Nazis and white supremacists believe in, and we want them to get away from us or there's going to be trouble. So it was interesting to see it unfold there in a different way, wow. But the anti-fascists didn't show up, and neither did any other group. So there was actually no violence in that one.
And obviously, this is usually a political podcast, and the reason I'm talking to you about this is because of President Trump's involvement and his comments. And I want to get a sense from you again, because you've covered these groups that, as you said, getting their disgusting message out. I mean, they're hateful groups, literally by definition. They're hateful groups, and it is obviously no. It is sort of not in the American vocabulary that a president of the United States would be okay with these groups taking comfort in his words. But can you sort of describe for us the way you understand these groups have received the comments that President Trump made going back to Saturday and Monday and Tuesday about the incident in Charlottesville?
He might as well put on a cheerleading outfit for these white supremacist groups. I hate to say that about our president, but that is exactly how they saw it. And I think one of the big arguments here that sort of drives me crazy is that when people start talking about this, they're like, no, he denounced, he did, he said he was against bigotry and against white supremacy. that is true. He did in his comments say that this is wrong. The unfortunate thing is that he kept saying but, and that but is a dog whistle to these groups who heard him say but, and they're listening for anything that gives them a hint that maybe he can't quite say that he's with them, but that he indeed is with them. And that's how they felt. I looked at many different websites. We went on to see what they were talking about, these neo-Nazi groups and these white supremacist groups. And what they were saying is the president, quote, loves us and he is with us. And this is just the beginning. The war is on. Those words are so disturbing to so many Americans, including myself, because they believe there is a culture war going on and they intend to win it by trying to recruit. And not just recruit from, certain parts of the country. They're looking at college campuses. They're looking at intellectuals, if you will. They are trying to get young people to see things their way. And their whole thing is, look, the president's with us. He just can't completely come out and say it, but he's with us. So you come and be with us too. They loved what the president said.
So that being the case, do you anticipate, and again, you've covered some of this stuff over time, will we see an uptick of marches, of protests? Are we going to see an uptick of this kind of activity in your talks with any law enforcement? Are they anticipating an uptick because these groups now feel emboldened, because the President of the United States offered words that seem to give them comfort?
David, we've already seen an uptick. We've already seen that. If you look at any group that tracks hate, they will tell you that the number of hate incidents are up, that they're seeing more and more recruiting, more and more flyering, if you will, on college campuses. And yes, more and more of these meetings and rallies, many more were planned after this. And you notice that some of those ended up being canceled because there is a point at which I think some of these groups, the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, know that they could be in real trouble with law enforcement, and they were actually surprised. We saw some back and forth on some of their communications that they were surprised that police were arresting them as well, which was an interesting comment from these groups. But yes, indeed, there is an uptick, and indeed, they do feel like they're becoming normalized. That's all they have ever wanted. They want people to pay attention to them, and they want to be normalized. And they use the same words that the president used, or I should say the president uses the same words that they use. They start talking about our culture and our country and the way things used to be and going and making America great again. These things are to them dog whistles. They love hearing this because they're like, yes, let's go back. Let's go back before there was integration. Let's go back before black people were allowed to vote. I mean, they literally want things to go backwards, and they want to see a white America. And if nobody believes that, they should believe it now. Listen to what they're saying. Believe that that is exactly what they believe in.
But as you just said earlier, if the president was sitting here participating in this podcast with us, he would say, guys, I said how hateful these groups are. I denounced them. And he would say, Sarah, you said at the top that these two different groups, the counter-protesters and the protesters, got in there and it was a combustible moment. And so that is what I meant by both sides. What would you, I mean, he would say that and he would be able to justify it by some of the things he said. But when he says both sides or many sides, that also is code for something.
It is code for something, but I think what he's saying is, look, he did, and we do need to give credit where credit is due. He did denounce what happened, but he was most passionate about the fact that he tried to blame the left for doing the worst, basically. Tried to sort of say, well, if they're the ones, nobody's talking about them. And he was very passionate there. You noticed his passion rise the third time that he spoke about this.
This is when he came back after denouncing it and felt the need to say more. Yeah.
Correct. And the second time he came out, he read a statement. He was very wooden. I gotta say, from the people that have been watching that, and I've been looking at their Twitter feeds and talking to people on the phone from all different parts of the country, and they're saying to me, he didn't believe what he was saying. All he was doing was reading a statement that somebody wrote from him. You felt no passion. You felt like he had no feeling about it. But boy, the next day he did. And that's the day when he used but and started talking about taking down other monuments like George Washington. And by the way, that is a first. I have never heard a president of the United States say something like, well, what about George Washington? Or let's get rid of that one. I mean, if that's what you're talking about. I mean, some of this stuff really strikes at the heart of what does this country want to be? What do we want to be? And that is a war, if you will, that's going on. If it's a war of words right now, then that's what it is. But that is what's going on here. Who do we want to be? Do we want to be a country of inclusion and integration and coming together and learning about one another and multiculturalism? Or do we want to be the other thing, segregated, people being left out of the conversation, people being crushed by oppression? Those are the two sides, and they are polar opposite sides. And of course, emotions get high. I want to make one more point, because there are a lot of people who love to come after everyone, especially myself, saying, well, you just said that Antifa is, it's fine that they were violent. You're not decrying the stuff that they do. Look, the anti-fascist group has groups within it. There are anti-fascists that just go out and they protest against these things. And there are a group called the Black Bloc that wear all black. They cover their faces, and they come out and they have decided that violence is the answer because they believe non-violence doesn't work. That group exists without the white supremacists showing up and without the Nazis showing up. We saw them in Berkeley. We've seen them all over the Bay Area in California. I covered them as a reporter when I worked in the Bay Area. So I understand that they are an issue because they tend to be destructive, particularly to property, trying to basically create a world of chaos. And that's wrong too. Right. But
to use your
they wouldn't have been
Houston,
in Charleston.
I would just say, to use your example from Houston, those would be the folks if it was just a rally of people on the left, that the police would have cordoned off into that pen to allow the other folks to proceed with their protests, right? I mean...
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the police handled the situation in Houston very, very strategically, and they kept a battle from within the sort of alt-right from exploding, because there were certainly words and there were a lot of guns in that particular rally as well. People were dressed in like they were going to war in Iraq, and I'm not joking. They were completely loaded with arms and wearing camouflage, and we could hear words being expressed to this neo-Nazi group that we don't want those bleeps here. And so things were getting heated. Police stepped right in and pushed that group into another area and cordoned them off with gates to make sure that there wasn't a crossing of the line there. I don't know, exactly what happened in Charlottesville, but it certainly looked like there were some missteps made there.
Sarah, stay right there. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back, everyone, with more with Sarah Seidner right here on the Daily DC.
I'm David Axelrod, host of the Axe Files podcast, where we have revealing conversations with key figures from the political world. Subscribe in iTunes or your favorite app, and check out the archive to hear our conversations with guests like Karl Rove, Doris Kearns Goodwin, Alastair Campbell, Katie Couric, and more. Smart political conversations without all the yelling and talking points. Subscribe to the Axe Files today.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Daily DC. I'm David Chalian, CNN political director, joined on this Friday feature conversation by Sarah Seidner, CNN national correspondent, who's based in Los Angeles but joins me from New York today. Sarah, one of the things that Donald Trump did today, Thursday, was to try to change the conversation. Which is actually a very typical Trump tactic. But he wanted to turn the attention now to one of history, culture, monuments. He clearly didn't want the conversation anymore that he was equating Nazis with counter-protesters, which he did, and that still lingers out there, and he hasn't now corrected that. That is sort of his last word on that aspect of this. But he now is trying to have this other conversation, one where I think politically he's probably on a bit safer ground, because this is a fundamental question that many people in the country have: how to observe and recognize history, both history in the country and people's personal family history in certain regions of the country, like the South or what have you. It gets very, very personal. While at the same time, some of that history could be completely offensive to many Americans. How to recognize it and honor it. This is exactly the battle that Nikki Haley, now the UN ambassador, but then the South Carolina governor, was dealing with when she came to a resolution about removing the Confederate flag from the state grounds there in Columbia. That is a real debate that communities are having.
It's a debate that's being had within families, like you said. This is a very emotional subject, and it has to do with the Civil War, the fact that we're still discussing it, it still affects this country. The remnants of what happened are still affecting this country. And I think we can't state that enough. Everyone says, oh, well, that's history. That's in the past. That's in the past. It's not in the past. It's in people's hearts now. The Confederate flag, I grew up in the South. I remember seeing the Confederate flag, and I remember not feeling any kind of way about it. It was just normal. It was in people's houses, on people's trucks. People would wave them. I mean, it seemed like just kind of part of the fabric, except for when it is used against people. And I had that happen to me too, on a personal note, where someone called me the N-word and, sort of went by in their truck, and there was that flag. And so that flag has certain symbols and it leaves a scent, if you will, leaves a feeling, if you will, to some people who believe that it is about oppression, it's about slavery, it's about fear. And then on the other side of that argument, there are people like, look, this is a part of our history. It's a matter of Southern pride, if you will, a Southern heritage, if you will. You will hear that a lot in the South. This is my right to fly this flag because it's a part of my history. It's a part of my family's history and a part of the South history. And why are we trying to erase it? Here's the problem with that, I think. From the perspective of those who have been afraid and made to fear the flag, does the president care about those of us who actually have fear when it comes to the use of these symbols? And I think he needs to address that, because yes, there is a group of people, a large number of people, especially in the South, who feel like we are going too far by taking down the monuments. We are going too far by trying to, sort of remove some of these, Southern heroes in their minds, and they don't want to see a slippery slope where we start removing all kinds of things like Jefferson, or as the president said, or George Washington, who had slaves. And so there's a fear that the history of the country is going to be crushed. But I wonder if the president thinks about those who actually have been afraid because of the use of these symbols against their families, and who have stories that are far worse than mine about the use of these symbols to injure. Because I think as a president, you're speaking to everyone, correct? You're trying to, quote, as he said, bring people together. He has done the exact opposite this week.
And it seems, there have been a couple different kinds of solutions that different communities or states have come with. One is, yes, these things are part of history, even when they are part of being on the wrong side of history. They are part of history, and perhaps, a museum is the right place for them rather than out in the public square. Others, I know in some communities, have erected statues that sort of of Martin Luther King or other iconic figures in different parts of history that sort of stand staring at the Confederate general or what have you in some of these places. Communities have come to different resolution. It did not sound to me from the president's tweets that he was trying to forge some sort of solutions here.
No, he was directly talking to those people in the United States who believe that the Confederacy and believe that the symbols of the Confederacy are a symbol of pride. That is it. It was very clear, if you look at the tweet that he sent out, that he was trying to talk to those folks. And, in our history, these symbols were really to appease the South, right? To try to keep it from seceding even after the Civil War. Right. And guess what? Some of these symbols came back during the civil rights movement. So if you don't get a clue as to why they're being used, you need to go back and read your history books. I mean, that is ultimately the answer to all this. Look at the history books and see when these symbols came back into vogue. It was during the civil rights era. Why would you do that during the civil rights era if they don't mean something negative towards Black folks and Latino folks and people of different colors that live in this country and love this country? And I do want to say, I love my country. For the most part, I am proud of how this country has come about. And I think so many of us feel this way. But I love my Southern friends. And some of them fly Confederate flags. Do I want to crush them and make them feel bad about, their heritage, if you will? No, but I certainly want them to recognize that they can hurt me using some of that against me, or using some of that against their neighbors who had family members who disappeared under that Confederate flag.
So, Sarah, just in our last moment, as I'm listening to you and I have watched you all week on our air, And as you said, you've been monitoring these groups, covering these groups. So where to from here? Where does this conversation go from here, or does Charlottesville end up being a one-off thing, and we have this flare-up in this moment, and then it sort of retreats from people's minds?
I don't think it's going to retreat from people's minds, because you're going to keep seeing these rallies and you're going to keep hearing some of this come out of the president's mouth, and you're going to keep seeing reaction from those who are appalled by what he said and those who support what he says. This country I think we're having a big moment here. We're sort of in the midst of it feels like a shift. And I have no idea where that shift is going to lead us. I'm just hoping that we never again see someone killed or injured because of this horrible sort of situation that we found ourselves in. And if anyone thought that, we were kind of in a post-racial society, well, welcome to reality. We are definitely not.
There's no doubt about that. Sarah Seidner, thank you for the excellent work this week. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. That does it for this edition of the Daily DC. Thanks to all of you for listening, and I hope you'll tune in again right here on Monday.
Hey, before you go, we wanted to let you know that we just launched the ability for anyone to advertise on CNN podcasts. You're just a few clicks away from reaching millions of people in a way that you never have before. Advertise for a business, event, or kick off an awareness campaign for your brand. Start today at purewinning.com/CNN. Integrating podcasts into your marketing mix has never been easier. We'll even tell you how to save 15% on your CNN campaigns for the rest of 2017. Go to purewinning.com/CNN to get started.